Tukatai here with my good friend Hammersticks with a critical review of D&D Next.
For those who don't know, or want to hear it again, D&D Next stands for the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons. It's technically the 5th edition, and it's currently in beta.
Over the years, ever since the, late 70s?
Yeah.
There's been several editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Every so often, as the needs of the community grew, Wizards would, promote 2nd edition after 1st, then 3rd, then 4th. But as of recently, 4th edition wasn't that well received.
Yeah, if you mention 4th edition D&D, a lot of people will go into a fit of rage. I've seen people explode. Literally.
Boom.
Yeah.
Done. But there's actually a competing company, Paizo, who made Pathfinder, which is actually very similar to 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, because people really did love 3rd edition, but it needed a little bit of an update. So at this point, the most popular Dungeons & Dragons product isn't made by the company that makes Dungeons & Dragons.
And this is really kind of a gut shot to Wizards of the Coast, because their largest, or the absolute largest, tabletop game of all time is crippling to a new company. And people are so divided over what edition they like of D&D, they often just switch to Pathfinder.
So it's truly of critical importance that D&D Next not only is a great edition of D&D, but really brings the community together under one banner. So it's not so many arguments over what's better, 4th edition or 3rd edition, which often reminds me of the console wars.
Yeah, it really kind of is. And in this case, it's not like one console will prevail. If this edition doesn't succeed, it may either be the last edition, or 6th edition will be an absolute failure, because people won't buy it because 5th edition sucked.
So, the real goal with this is they need to make something that everyone who's enjoyed every edition will enjoy. Something that unites the previous 4 editions, takes everything that's good about them into one product.
Mm-hmm. All the, optimizers, newbies, old-timers, everyone has to come together to like this edition.
Without further delay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the system. We'll be mostly highlighting either very important aspects of the system, or things that definitely stick out as opposed to previous editions.
And keep in mind, everyone, there is more than what we're talking about here, but we're going over the very basics. Things you might be interested in if you played other editions, or if you're looking to play 5e, these are the things you should know.
So, the first thing we really need to go into is how an average turn in combat works.
And how it's changed.
And it's changed quite a lot.
Especially compared to 4th edition, it's a very significant difference. And even 3.5, it certainly has one big difference.
Yeah. So, we'll start off by talking about the absence of minor or swift actions in all of its entirety, which in both 3.5 and 4th edition were sort of a sub-action that you could use as opposed to like a big attack or whatever. It was something that would give a small bonus, or sometimes it was a heal, but they've just gutted it. It's gone.
As a matter of fact, there is really only standard actions and movement. Although movement works in a very different way, we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah. Let's talk about how we feel about minor actions being gone, because minor actions added a lot of differences in a turn, and it made things that weren't so important that you just do to slightly alter the turn. Like, Paladins had things where they could mark opponents using minor actions.
Yeah. I believe Cure Light Wounds was a minor action as well.
Yeah.
The main thing was that Wizards stated that they wanted to make casters more active and let them maybe attack with a standard action or cast an aggressive spell while healing or buffing someone as a minor. So they've, I guess, renounced that idea, and they still probably are working for active casters, as we've seen, but it's a very different approach.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons is the removal of the minor action is it cuts a huge amount into the amount of decisions you have to make in a turn, and you're like, oh, what's that shit? I make less decisions? But Dungeons & Dragons, a game, where you play with 5 people at a table, and a lot of the time you're waiting for those other 4 people to finish. When I used to run D&D 4th edition, I actually had to get a little timer to make players make their turns faster, because they wouldn't be paying attention during other people's turns, and when it got to them, they didn't know what to do. So this really cuts into that, where people will be able to take their turn really fast, and it will go around the table faster. So even though you're making one less decision during your turn, because of it, your turns are coming faster and faster.
Which is honestly a quote-unquote good thing, because if players aren't bored and waiting around, and if combat doesn't take half an hour or an hour, I can't see how that's bad.
Yeah. So, there is places where you feel like, oh, if only there's a minor action so that you could have this cool action, but it definitely accomplishes something by being gone.
Yeah, faster combat is certainly a thing to look forward to.
Alright, so the next big change, which is
huge.
Huge. No D&D games have really been like this. There's no move action per se.
Yep, there's just movement.
So, whereas previously you'd have to move, then attack, or attack, then move, you can move 10 feet of your movement, attack, move another 20 feet, and I cannot stress how much that changes.
This does exist, keep in mind, in other systems, but it has never existed in any edition of D&D. There was something similar to it in AD&D, but not nearly the same.
This really changes how there's hit and run tactics can happen. Charging would have to be changed. There's a lot of mechanics that really need to change because they're all built around attacking then moving, or moving then attacking.
The real cool part is that it makes melee combat a lot more exciting, because no longer is it just, oh, I need to move 2 squares and hit this guy, and that's kind of just it. You might, attack someone, and then move somewhere else, and then go prone after already having approached the guy for combat.
Yeah, that's sort of another thing. You could have certain actions that only take a certain feat of movement, so rather than the old things where it takes an entire move action to do this, an entire move action to do that, you could have things that just straight up, oh, opening that door, just subtract 5 feet of movement from your action, your round.
Which is actually really interesting, because it brings up the question of, if this could happen in later D&D editions, or if they could actually further this, like if they divided the standard action. We'll have to see, as these are only packets we're getting right now, so they might actually add more actions you can take as part of your movement as opposed to a move action.
As one further thing, you may be a little familiar with reactions. They had them in 3.5, and they had them to some extent in 4th edition. They're sort of consolidating it more, where things are specifically labeled as reactions, and you typically only have one reaction per turn, which you can either use as an opportunity attack, which is the most common thing, but there'll also be a lot of special abilities that you take as reactions.
For those who play a lot of 4th edition, if you remember immediate actions, they're a lot like that, but not nearly the same.
Yeah, I like when they consolidate things under like these big, strong themes. Like there's, oh, we're gonna have reaction actions, rather than just having, oh, by the way, you do this in response, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, it makes things very simple yet flexible, because no longer do you have these very specific puzzle pieces that you work together. It's just a very broad category that can be made to a whole bunch of subdivisions.
Combat's going to be really flexible in 5th edition, it seems.
Yeah, like we've even done a little bit of playtesting, and it's actually really kind of relaxing. It's very free.
Hi. Next up, the opportunity attacks directly have sort of a small change. They really are only provoked by moving out of your reach. Whereas in the past, casting in melee range, shooting a bow in melee ranged, most ranged attacks would also provoke opportunity attacks. They're really consolidating it and saying, not to confuse new players, opportunity attacks only happen when blank.
Which brings us to those who play 4th edition. once again, there are people who are on both sides of this. Shifting, some people love it, some people hate it. It's gone. There is a way to do it, and that's disengaging. Since that now the only way to provoke opportunity attacks is to move out of a threatened square, you can now take a disengage action as a standard to move out, which means that you can't shift every single turn in combat unless you're going to dedicate your entire turn to that.
And honestly, I think this is one of those changes that's almost as big as the movement change. Opportunity attacks for melee characters is incredible amount of their strategy. So the fact that you have to use a standard action to shift, or 5-foot step as it's known in some other editions, it's really a consideration. You have to give up your entire attack if you really want to move away from someone.
Well, it's very big. Some people, might see it as opportunity attacks being weaker, but they are stronger because you can't just shift. I remember when playing 4th edition, I shifted almost every single turn. Melee or caster, it was just a good idea. As long as you're anywhere close to an enemy, you need to shift. So now it's really a big decision. Am I going to threaten myself by moving away from this guy? Am I going to hit him and try and kill him and then move away? Will I take the hits and just keep going? It's a big deal.
And there is some disadvantage to it. Possibility is that you'll get into a lot of situations where you'll engage someone and you'll just stop moving. I think there might be some situations where you just feel stuck, and in some ways that's less fun, but it's a bigger decision. What do you feel about it?
The way I see it, I think that if you're truly stuck, you can kind of sashay away around the person, remaining within their reach, and then try and dip out the disengage, since you can break up your movement now, so you can move, disengage, and then start running.
That's a very good point. So you could actually, as long as you're within range of your target, you're fine, so you could sort of, if you need to get around him, you move around him, and then you disengage in the direction you need to.
And then keep moving.
And then keep moving. And it's interesting. Disengage also is pretty good, because it's 10 feet, so it's 2 squares of movement, which is different than the old 5-foot step or shifting.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. If you had to trade a standard for 5 feet of movement, that would really hurt.
That'd be kind of crap. I do like that they made the consideration and said, you know what, 10 feet, that's very reasonable.
Yeah. Combat's going to be so different. First, between breaking up your movement, but also, if you're next to a dude, you're stuck there unless you're really going to commit to running away.
Yeah.
You can't just casually, oh, I'm going to shift over to this guy, play with him for a little bit, and then shift over to that guy, do the little footsies. No. You decided to run to that orc, and that orc's going to be your target unless you have a compelling reason to change targets.
And if you do move out of his squares, you're either going to be hit or you're not going to attack this turn. You're moving, that's it.
Alright, so let's move on to some other actions. Dodge is a powerful new option for anyone. There's been similar things in the past, but what it does is you can use it, it's an action of course. It gives you a +4 bonus to AC and to dexterity saving throws until the end of your next turn in fact. And +4 is a lot.
4th edition players may remember Total Defense. This is very similar, but vastly more powerful.
I can totally see being a tanking character, and if I'm in there and I've used some reason to keep everyone stuck to me, I'll dodge all day. Oh my god, that's like an additional 30% chance to dodge.
Yeah, and keep in mind, although it's very powerful, it's certainly not broken. Because there are ways to circumnavigate it, like for instance through magic, but it is definitely a very powerful option available to all melee classes, and even casters, really.
I could definitely see as a caster, you're in a tight spot, dodge. It may not be as useful to casters, because casters seem to be able to cast a melee range now, so maybe they'll have something else up their sleeve, but dodge is a pretty attractive option to anybody.
It certainly is. I could easily imagine maybe like an archer running through combat and they need to get from one side to the other. and they take the dodge action and then just spend their movement running through crowds of enemies.
Yeah. It's... Oh my... there's so many applications to this. I can't believe it's +4.
It's a +4 to AC and dexterity saving throws, which is a nice touch, and it makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say the majority of attacks are either on AC or Dex.
There's a lot of, like, you know, fire works off of Dex, you know, traps often work off of Dex, so it's very, very good.
And you have some more standard actions. Grapple, which is always complex. Help, which is very similar to Aid Another.
Yes, it's much the same in the way it works. You know, you take your action to make someone better at something, but it does rely off of a new rule in the system. That is a core rule.
One of the cooler new mechanics of D&D Next is advantage and disadvantage.
And this is what the help ability uses now, as opposed to just like a +2.
It's quite interesting. So, rather than the old system of -2 and +2, depending on, you know, the situation or special abilities, what a lot of things have turned into is it either grants you advantage or disadvantage. And how that works is you roll 2d20s, and if you have advantage, you'll take the higher number. If you have disadvantage, you'll take the lower number.
This is a lot more wild, less predictable, and honestly, way more fun. It's much more satisfying to roll 2d20, and it actually, the cool part is it doubles your chance to get a crit.
Which is really interesting, because they always sort of had this themes with the rogue, where it's like, oh, they get a lot of advantage, or, and so what, +2 in that case, and that allows them to do extra things. But in this case, they'll want advantage from stealthing or whatnot, because it will double their chance to crit, which reinforces another theme that the rogues have always had, which is higher crit chance.
And going back to help, being able to grant someone an advantage is huge now. You're not giving them a +2, you're giving them really twice the chance to crit, twice the chance to succeed at a skill check. Of course, it's not directly double, but it is a significant bump. Or, honestly, they could both roll like shit, and it just happens, because it is a chance-based game, but lack of predictability makes it a little more exciting.
Yeah, and disadvantage is also pretty cool, because it doubles your chance to critically fumble. So if you decide to go against someone in a very disadvantageous position, and you roll a 1 and a 7, well, sorry, automatic miss.
And honestly, like, whenever someone gave me a Bane spell, and they were like, oh, you get a -2, or like they cast Doom upon me in Pathfinder, I didn't really care. I mean, it is bad, and anyone who knows how much about statistics realizes that a -2 is actually pretty serious. It just doesn't feel very serious. You don't really feel like it's a big deal at all. And when you cast it upon opponents, any newbie thinks, oh, -2 to attack rolls, well, I get a +7. That doesn't matter at all. But disadvantage feels seriously scary.
You're rolling more dice, but to your disadvantage.
Yeah, you take the shitty one, and that feels bad to a lot of players, but also being able to give an enemy disadvantage feels fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really, really sweet system. The one issue I can see with it is, well, the system of like, oh, you have +2? Well, you have +2 and +2, +4. Advantage and disadvantage doesn't stack. Supposedly, disadvantage cancels out advantage, and if you had 2 advantage and 1 disadvantage, you'd have advantage. But if you do look through the system, there is weird cases where this ability gives you advantage that cannot be counteracted by disadvantage. But what happens if you have advantage that can't be counteracted and disadvantage that can't be counteracted? Do you roll 4 dice or something?
Yeah, here we do have some Yu-Gi-Oh-esque issues, but overall, the system itself, the advantage-disadvantage idea, is very cool. Although, we may run into trouble in the future.
Another thing that is interesting about the way they present it is you gain advantage and disadvantage through these special abilities and spells, of course, but unlike 4th edition, where they had very strict rules for If you're flanking, you get combat advantage. If you're hidden and you hit them, you have combat advantage. This is mostly DM's discretion. There's a lot of situations where the DM could just say, oh, I see, you're firing from a higher ground and they can't really see you very well. I'll give you combat advantage.
And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of situations when it will just say, this grants advantage, but DM's discretion plays a much larger role in the entire system, and especially shows up here. It's often expressed here, but DM's discretion is all over the manual.
Personally, as a DM, though, at least with this system, I would be actually very cautious in giving someone advantage or disadvantage for something minor, because of all of the things that interact with it. Because there's so many abilities already that give them advantage or disadvantage. Like, if, let's say I'm a DM, and I decide I'm going to give my players advantage every time they flank, a lot of these abilities that are balanced around, you know, oh, sweet, I finally get advantage, are sort of lame, because you can't get double advantage.
Yeah, or because you will have it all the time.
So, as a DM personally, I think, under most circumstances, I will actually just give people +2 and -2, and I'll let their abilities use the advantage and disadvantage system.
Yeah, but the fact that it exists opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. And it certainly can encourage players a lot more to do riskier things. Or to stay safe when they have disadvantage.